Welcome, everybody. It is time for another episode of Blitz Boys. I'm going to be flying solo this week. Slate is at work. We have a lot to talk about. We're going to review a lot of games from week five, go in depth on them, and then we're also going to look at a couple matchups happening on Thursday and Friday upcoming, and we'll talk about those as well, give you some predictions. So let's go ahead and dive right into this week's Blitz Boys. All right, so like I said, we have a lot to talk about. We're going to go ahead and look at last week's games and talk about these real quick. So first up, we're going to talk about is Clemson at Syracuse. Syracuse had a lot of hype coming into this game. Clemson has obviously had a down season to this point, two losses already to Duke, and then the Florida State last week lost to Florida State, and I would say an embarrassing way. Poor play calling down the stretch there, a game that they should have won on paper and watching, they were a better football team than Florida State that day, and they ended up losing that game. Syracuse undefeated coming into this game. Garrett Schrader, back again, has looked very good to start the year. And then they go out there and they get beat 31-14. Their offense could get nothing going the entire day. We knew it would be a struggle too. Clemson's defense has played well pretty much all season. I mean, they really struggled in that Duke game. But aside from that, I mean, you look back at Florida State last week, they really held Florida State in check for the most part. And so it was going to come down to if Syracuse defense was up to the task. It was very evident they were not. It just looks like at this point, Syracuse is destined to be a mid-tier ACC team. Even in a season like this, where it looks like the ACC is wide open and they have an opportunity to make a statement. I mean, we had talked about it last week. They obviously have a very difficult road ahead. They had this Clemson game, and they play UNC and Florida State all in a consecutive stretch here. But this was their chance to prove that they can run with the big boys, so that they can hang up at the top of the conference. They have the returning talent to do so, and the system in place there to be an ACC contender. And this was even worse than last year. Last year, they go down to Clemson. They're beating up on Clemson 21-0 at halftime, I believe, maybe 21-7, and then they lose that game. They were never really in this football game. And a huge bounce back win for Clemson. I'm not going to say they have a shot at the ACC. I still think they need some things to happen in front of them. Still think they have a very difficult road ahead of them as well. But Syracuse has flat out proven that they're just not ready to be an ACC title contender yet. Is it the head coach? Is it the roster? I don't know. We'll see. I'm pretty sure this is going to be Garrett Trader's last year. And we're going to have to see where Syracuse goes from here. Now, the question for Syracuse is how do you respond going forward? What are they going to look like from here on out? Again, they have to play UNC and Florida State in their next couple of games. And are we looking at kind of a similar shutdown to last year? Last year they were 5-0. Looks very good heading into Clemson. They lost that game, and then they lost, I think, 4 out of their next 6. Is that kind of the stretch we're going to see them head into here again, or is this going to be a team that can regroup, gather themselves back up, and persevere through the rest of the year? That'll be something we have to watch out for. Next game we're going to talk about is Florida at Kentucky. This was another game. Florida was never really in it. Kentucky has looked very good all season. Again, I said this last week. Their one struggle so far had been against Eastern Kentucky. And now all of a sudden, they're sitting here. They're undefeated. They're ranked finally. They're number 20 in the AP poll. And they have to head down to Georgia. I think this is going to be a very good game. The spread right now is at 14. Watching how Georgia played last week and how Kentucky has continued to improve week by week on offense and defense, I see Kentucky covering the spread. I think this is going to be a tight battle back and forth. Kentucky likes to get a fast start, and Georgia has shown a tendency to have slow starts this season, and that can put Georgia in a lot of trouble. And so I think Kentucky is absolutely going to hang around closer than 14. I think the spread, when I looked earlier today, was 14 and a half. I see this game being closer. Um, Kentucky is going to make some noise. Mark Stoops has this team. He's taken them from a mid to bottom tier SEC East. Not even talking about the SEC as a whole. SEC East. For years they were a laughing stock. They've improved. They improve. And now all of a sudden you come into every year, and I don't I feel like the media doesn't look at this enough and talk about it because they're not winning SEC titles. They're not a Georgia. They don't have the big name behind them like Florida or Alabama, LSU, so on and so forth. But this is a consistent team that's close to it. It's not rare for them to be in the conversation as a 10-win team anymore. And I think they absolutely deserve a little bit more respect. And now, again, this is a team that's going to get put on one of the biggest stages in college football. You're going on the road to the number one team, the back to back national champions, and you get to prove what you're really made of. This is a game I'm beyond excited for this weekend. It's going to be our game of the week going out of the tunnel. So we'll be talking a lot about that game between Georgia and Kentucky. So make sure you head over there Saturday morning and check that out. But they look very impressive here. Florida's offense had the same struggles we knew they had coming in. They can run the ball, but Graham Mertz cannot throw the ball to save his life. And when you're a one-dimensional offense, you're never really going to prosper against a very good set of teams. We saw it against Utah. Now we see it here against Kentucky. They did beat Tennessee earlier, which I still think is an impressive win. I'm not buying back into the Tennessee hype yet. I know they just beat South Carolina, and we're going to talk about the game here in a little bit. Um, but Florida might make a bowl game this year. I have them, in my mind right now. They're a 500 team at the end of the season, 6-6. They might squeak into a bowl game, but still not impressed with Florida. They had obvious cracks. I was very shocked that they were even ranked to begin with, but there they are, and now Kentucky's ranked. I have to go on the road and play Georgia. I'm excited for that game, though. I think it's gonna be a great game. Next game we're going to talk about is in the Sun Belt. South Alabama visiting James Madison. James Madison continues to impress year in and year out. They are undefeated again. I think they're sitting at 5-0 right now. Absolutely impressive. The way that they've looked to start both seasons, and I really don't. It still irritates me to this day that they denied James Madison's waiver to be postseason eligible this year. This is the team that should absolutely be in contention to win the Sun Belt. Instead, they're 5-0, and it basically means nothing at the end of the day because even if they win their Sun Belt division, they can't play for the conference championship. They're not going to make a bowl game. It's disheartening. It's BS. But James Madison, I am excited to watch them next year. The way they have developed this program, not just at the FBS level. Obviously, they've only been here for one full season. They're in the middle of their second season, but what they built it up into as an FCS school, a year in year out powerhouse, pretty much on the same level as North Dakota State. And then they get the promotion. I am really excited to see where the James Madison team goes from here and continues to grow. Maybe in 5 years, we're talking about James Madison, joining the ACC, depending on what happens there, or a Power Five conference, because they have the pedigree to do it. They have the coaching staff to do it. Thoroughly impressed with James Madison. If you look at the other side, South Alabama, some questionable coaching decisions. One of them, in my eyes, was not kicking an onside kick. They scored to get it to 31-23. It was, I think, just over a minute left, and they didn't do an onside kick. They did have all three timeouts, and I get that, but that was a little. I would at least still go for the onside kick. Regardless, they made the stop, and then they just couldn't do anything on offense. They went backwards, and then I think threw an interception on the last play. But South Alabama had a lot of hype around them coming into the season. They won or they lost one game last year, two games. Um, Go to their bowl game, they got stomped in the bowl game, and then to start this year, they're 2-3 right now. They have an impressive win over a Power Five team in Oklahoma State, and I understand Oklahoma State hasn't looked that good since that game, but still, the fact that South Alabama was able to go into Stillwater, Oklahoma, and beat Oklahoma State 33-7 is impressive. Uh, but their only other win right now is over Southeastern Louisiana, an FCS school. They lost to Central Michigan, now James Madison and Tulane. So with how much talent that team returned and the same coaching staff, all this other stuff, for them to be sitting at 2-3 right now is very concerning. They definitely don't have an easy road ahead. They play Louisiana Monroe and Southern Miss the next 2 weeks, two of the worst teams in the Sun Belt. Louisiana Monroe has actually looked much better than what they have in the past, but um, then they play Louisiana, Troy, Arkansas State, who's having a huge resurgence after losing their first two games of the year. They're now sitting at 3-2. Then they play Marshall and Texas State. So their last 5 games of the year are going to be brutal for them. They absolutely need to win the next two against Louisiana Monroe and Southern Miss. That'll put them at 4-3, and then they need to find a way to win two of those other bowl games, or excuse me, two of those other games to be eligible for a bowl game. All of a sudden we're talking about preseason. We're talking about South Alabama is one of the favorites to win the Sun Belt. Who knows what's going to happen this season? And now they're sitting here at 2-3, and the future looks bleak. They might not even make a bowl game. Just looking at that upcoming schedule, so they have an uphill fight ahead of them, a far cry from where we thought they were coming into the season. The other game we talked about on Saturday morning was Virginia visiting Boston College, the battle of the worst teams in the ACC. Virginia really looked like they had control of this game. I thought it was theirs. They were up 21-7 at halftime. And then in the third quarter, Boston College goes on a 17-0 run. They go up 24-21. Virginia kicks a field goal to tie it. And then with 2 minutes left, Boston College kicks another field goal. And then they get a late fourth down stop to seal the victory. I really thought this was going to be Virginia's game to break through. Boston College's only win up to this point was over an FCS school, and they almost lost that game. Now Virginia's going to play an FCS school this weekend, I believe. But just watching how Virginia played NC State, I was really impressed with Virginia. So they were much better than their record had shown, especially with how they hung around in that game. And then just collapse in the third quarter here, and that ultimately dooms them. Um, Still don't have any hype or belief in Boston College at all. Let's look at their upcoming schedule here. They play Army this week. Army's going to win. Then they play Georgia Tech on the road. That's a coin flip game for me, just because of Georgia Tech losing to Bowling Green in embarrassing fashion. Bowling Green was one of the worst teams in the country coming into that game, and they just obliterated Georgia Tech. Like, it wasn't close at all. Um, then Boston College plays UConn. UConn is not a very good football team, but they're tough. They're going to hang around in that game, and who knows? Maybe they find a way to win that. So right now we're looking at two winnable games the rest of the season. Then they play Syracuse, Virginia Tech. Two games I don't see them winning. On the road at Pitt, I have that as another coin flip game because Pitt is horrible this season. That might be Pitt's only other win the rest of the year, and that's one team we didn't talk about on Saturday. Pitt is 1-4 right now, and they blew what I would say is their only other chance at a winnable game this season on the road to Virginia Tech. It wasn't close. Virginia Tech manhandled them for 4 quarters, and Pitt is looking at one game in the rest of the season that is absolutely winnable. They like to upset random teams, especially when they're bad. So who knows what happens there? But in terms of their ceiling, three wins. Um, Pitt is terrible this year. And then Boston College finishes with Miami. So it's not looking good for Boston College either. I would say their ceiling, 1, 2, 5 wins is Boston College's ceiling. It'd be really interesting to see if Jeff Hafley sticks around for another season. Let's go ahead. Let's go over to the Big 12. We had Kansas visiting Texas. I've said this in the other videos we put out this week about this game. If I'm Oklahoma right now, I am terrified of what this Texas team is going to do to us this weekend, especially coming off of what happened last year. Blowing them out wasn't close at all. This was easily a game Texas could have got caught looking ahead to that Oklahoma game. It's going to be a high-profile matchup. Game day is going to be there. It's a rivalry, all this other stuff. Instead, they locked down. They handled business against a very good Kansas team. I understand Jalen Daniels didn't play, and it was Jackson Bean. But Jackson Bean is still a very good quarterback. We saw that last year. Texas just manhandles them 40-14. It was a little, I would say, close, through the second quarter. And then Texas put their foot down and pulled away. The way that they were able to focus on the upcoming opponent, with it being we see it time and time again, with a huge game on the horizon. It's easy to get caught looking ahead and let even a mediocre team hang around with you. But I don't think Kansas is mediocre. I think they are a pretty decent football team, and Texas just stomped them. I think Texas is still the favorites to win the Big 12 right now. Obviously, this weekend's going to show a whole lot, but it's not looking good for me and my bet that they wouldn't win conference title with 4 years left. Otherwise, I have to get a tattoo, so it's not looking good for me. Next game we had was another very surprising result. We had Illinois at Purdue. I really thought Illinois had just had some bad breaks. Obviously, their offense struggled against Penn State, but I thought team-wise they were a much better team than Purdue. Purdue has really struggled to get their offense any sort of rhythm so far this season. That Graham Harrell came in as their offense coordinator. Hudson Card came in from Texas. And they just really struggled through the first 4 weeks to get any momentum. They just got dismantled by Wisconsin 38-17 the week before. Um, and I didn't have a lot of faith in Purdue. I really thought Illinois had the better roster, the better system. And I said this coming in. They were my favorites to win the Big 12 or Big 10 West, excuse me. Um, that has quickly vanished. But Purdue goes out there and they're both sides of the ball looked very good. I'm very impressed with how they looked. They held Illinois to 149 yards rushing, 226 passing. And then Purdue's offense was really balanced, 217 passing, 189 rushing. One thing I'm concerned with if I'm looking at Illinois, again, is this a team that's going to be able to make a bowl game? We're going to talk about the Nebraska game here in a little bit. They play them on Friday, and then they're at Maryland, home against Wisconsin, at Minnesota, home against Indiana, at Iowa, home against Northwestern. So just again, looking at their schedule right now, 3 winnable games. So again, their ceiling is 5. Are they able to squeak out a win over Iowa or Wisconsin? Minnesota, I would think, is of those 3 other games that they have, the one where they have the best shot at winning. But we're going to talk about the Nebraska game coming up. But if you're Purdue, all of a sudden you're looking a lot better. They had 1 win coming into this game. Now they don't have a generous schedule ahead either. They're at Iowa, against Ohio State at home, at Nebraska, at Michigan, home against Minnesota, at Northwestern, and home against Indiana. 2, 3, again, 5 wins, and then they need to pull a rabbit out of their hat. Iowa, I would actually say, is for both of these schools is looking more winnable now. Caden McNamara is out for the rest of the season with an ACL tear, which was devastating to see. Obviously, Iowa still has a very good defense, but their offense really struggled to move their ball. They didn't score any offensive touchdowns. We'll talk about that game here in a minute. The only touchdown came on a punt return, which is frustrating because I don't know how Brian Ferentz's contract has worked out, but I don't think that 7 points should count towards his total. But let's go ahead. Let's look at some more of the games. Boise State at Memphis was a very good football game. 3-point difference. Memphis pulls out the win 35-32. Huge win for them. This was another team coming into the season. Their head coach is on the hot seat. A lot of people are talking about them getting fired. And all of a sudden they go out there and they're able to block a kick late. And what ended up being the difference as they get a 3-point victory. Boise State is still struggling to get their season going. They're only 2 wins so far over North Dakota and FCS school, and then a conference opponent in San Diego State who's looking worse every week. It seems like. I still think they're in contention to win the Mountain West. I still think they have the roster to compete for the Mountain West, but it's going to be a dogfight the rest of the way up. So we'll have to see what happens out there. And the Mountain West is absolutely stacked right now. I think there's 4 top tier teams. We really don't know how Boise State stacks up with a lot of them. As they get into their in-depth conference play, we'll learn more. But I would say you got UNLV, Fresno, Air Force, and Wyoming are my 4 favorites right now in the Mountain West. The conference as a whole is playing really good football right now. Enjoy watching it. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch that unfold the rest of the season. Next game we had was LSU at Ole Miss. I had taken LSU in this. I just had no faith left in Ole Miss after watching them against Alabama, after I kind of got a little high on them. And I really thought LSU had turned a corner. Their defense had looked better each week. They had that tough loss at Florida State to start the season, or against Florida State. It was technically a neutral site. But every week they started to look better and better. I thought they were primed and ready to compete for the SEC West. And then all of a sudden they go on the road, their defense shits the bed. They gave up over 700 yards to Ole Miss. You obviously 55 points. Neither team had defense, but we don't expect defense out of Ole Miss. Um, but just utter collapse on LSU, and now you're eliminated from the college football playoff. Obviously, they still have a shot at the SEC West crown, depending on how the chips fall the rest of the season. But shout out to Ole Miss, who could have, licked their wounds after the Alabama loss and kind of hung their heads and go, "Oh shit, we're not here yet. We're not ready to compete for the SEC West." And all of a sudden, you go out and you stomp LSU. I wouldn't I guess you can't call it stopping. It's only a 6-point victory, but you beat a very good LSU team at home in a great game, and you're right back. You're poised. You're right in position if Alabama loses 2 games. Conference is yours. The SEC West is yours. Now you obviously need to finish out the season. They do have to play Georgia coming up, so that'll be an interesting game. Not at all how I saw it going. So big win for Ole Miss at home there. Another game that I picked completely wrong is actually all 3 of these games I picked the losers. So I didn't have a very good week and pick them, and we'll talk about that once we're done with the scoreboard here. Um, South Carolina just gets dismantled by Tennessee. Spencer Rattler was making comments after the game saying, "Oh, Tennessee treats this like it's the Super Bowl." Maybe you should have, because the team didn't show up at all. They looked abysmal on both sides of the ball. Tennessee came out firing. They wanted to win this game. I mean, you can make fun of them all you want for them treating it like a Super Bowl, but they have to treat every game like that the rest of the way out if they want any shot at a playoff or the SEC East, any of that stuff. They have to treat every game like that. Spencer Rattler's just being a bitch and a poor loser, but what do you expect? That's kind of been his MO his whole career in college so far. But huge win for Tennessee at home. Again, I had taken South Carolina. I thought it hasn't been good football, but it's better than what Tennessee has played. Tennessee has let a lot of bad teams hang around, and obviously losing to Florida didn't help. But South Carolina just failed to show up at all. I mean, also it was a blackout game, so I should have known better than to pick against Tennessee in that. But I guess I'll learn next year. Back to the Iowa Michigan State game we talked about. Um, thought this was Michigan State's game to lose. They went into the fourth quarter with the lead. Obviously, the punt return didn't help. At that point, I think it was tied. Um, but not going to talk too much on Michigan State just because we know the struggles are going through already this season with losing their head coach and all that drama that's unfolding. And I went on enough of a rant last week about Brian Ferentz and how terrible of an offensive coordinator he is. But I can't stand Iowa, and we'll have to wait and see, especially with Cade McNamara being down the rest of the year, what happens with this offense, because it's now, you're finally get 25 points a game. You've struggled to hit that quota every week, and now you lose your starting quarterback. That's going to be an uphill battle. To the surprise of the week, we're going to talk about West Virginia at TCU. Uh, I'd said this before. I thought West Virginia was dead in the water, especially at the Penn State loss. They didn't look very good against their FCS opponent in week 2. Now they've beaten Pitt, Texas Tech, and TCU. They're sitting here at 4-1. Obviously, I'm not trying to go as far as saying playoff talk or anything like that. They don't have an easy schedule ahead of them. They had 2 players get hurt this past week as well in this TCU game that ended up in the hospital. I think just today they went home, which was scary sights to see. Hopefully they're okay and they can make a speedy recovery. Um, Adds another little concern for West Virginia, but just the fact that they were able to turn the season around this much after how dark it looked with week 1. Coming into the season, Neil Brown was already on the hot seat. A lot of people questioned why he didn't get fired last year. The new AD said, "Yeah, we don't want that much turnover. Let's give him another year." And now here we are, and they look very good to start the season outside of that Penn State game. If you look ahead to what they have, they're at Houston, who's probably the worst team in the Big 12 right now, and then they're home against Oklahoma State. It's very possible we're sitting here they have a bye week in between, so 3 weeks from now, that we're talking about West Virginia being bowl eligible and competing to win the Big 12. Because on the backside of that, they're at UCF, home against BYU, at Oklahoma, home against Cincinnati, and then at Baylor. I see a path forward for West Virginia to possibly put themselves in the title game at Dallas. I mean, they play one of the top teams in the Big 12 the rest of the season in Oklahoma. Other than that, I mean, it's again, I say they're 6-1. UCF is a really good team. If they can finish games, we saw this past weekend they couldn't do that against Baylor, up 35-7. And Baylor comes back. I want to make sure I have that right. I know they were up big in that game. What was the score though? 35-7. They were up 35-7, and Baylor comes back and wins 36-35. So you wonder what that's going to do to them mentally going forward. They have a tough game against Kansas this week. Who knows where we're talking about West Virginia at the end of the season? Who knows what's going to happen in Oklahoma, depending on if I mean, obviously, if they beat Texas, they jump themselves up to the top of the Big 12 conversation. But the fact that West Virginia avoids them, they've already beaten TCU. They don't play Kansas. They don't play Kansas State. They dodge a lot of the big bullets coming out of the Big 12 this season. Um, all of a sudden, this goes from Neil Brown's getting fired. They're not going to make a bowl game to are they gonna be playing in Dallas in December? I mean, you can call me crazy, but that's where my head's going right now, just looking at how they played. Gritty, determined wins the past couple weeks, and now not the most difficult schedule in the world going forward. I definitely think they make a bowl game at the very least, but who knows what happens outside of there. Back to the Mountain West real quick. We had San Diego State at Air Force. Air Force just put it to them for 4 quarters, 49-10 win. I I said this before. My prediction right now is we have Fresno State versus Air Force at the end of the season for the Mountain West Championship. Very possible both of those teams are undefeated. Very possible that the winner of that gets a New Year's Six bowl bid. The Mountain West is loaded this season. Uh, Super entertaining to watch. If you're not watching Mountain West football, I highly encourage you to go check that out because they are playing really good football over there. Got great teams across the board. Air Force definitely. Um, so this week they play Wyoming, which I think is excuse me, it's gonna be next week. They have a bye week this week. Next week they have Wyoming at home. I think that decides their Mountain West division. Um, and actually, I forgot Mountain West removed divisions. Um, so it's very possible that outside of that, Air Force in the conference plays Colorado State, Hawaii, UNLV, and then they end the season with Boise State. So it's very possible if Air Force wins this, they all but punch their ticket to go to the Mountain West Conference Championship game. I'm pretty sure that's still the higher ranked or seed home field. I don't think they play neutral site yet. But I like Air Force more and more each week. And the last game we're going to talk about from the Week 5 scoreboard was our game of the week this past weekend on Saturday. It was Notre Dame at Duke. This was an amazing defensive battle back and forth. 2 weeks in a row now, Notre Dame's been locked in one of those. A lot of people are, bringing up more and more concerns about Notre Dame's offense. I think I less care about how their offenses looked because they're still able to move the ball here and there. They just haven't been able to finish as many drives. Um, they played two very high quality defenses the last 2 weeks. We saw what Duke did to Clemson's offense in week one. They haven't really been tested since. And Notre Dame's other big test was against Ohio State, who is probably one of the best defenses in the country this season. Um, and Notre Dame has survived one of those tests, lost a heartbreaker in the other one. But I still have high expectations for Duke. I am a little concerned, obviously, with Riley Leonard going down late in the game on the strip sack, with what ended up being the next to last play. Um, but it came out. I say it's a high ankle sprain, which is a difficult injury to push through. Hopefully, he takes the time to get healthy from that. They're on a bye week this week. Then they have NC State at home. I'm not really impressed by anything NC State's doing right now. They just finally benched Brennan Armstrong. I never understood why people had expectations behind him because he sucked at Virginia and everybody's well, he's being reunited with his offensive coordinator. The offensive coordinator sucked at Virginia too. Like there was nothing good about that relationship over there. But people were high on him and now he's benched because he sucks. Um, but the week after that, October 21st, is going to be the big game everybody's looking out for Duke. They're at Florida State. The week after that, they're at Louisville. and then they play UNC on November 11th. So 3 very difficult games still ahead in Duke's schedule. If I'm just hoping if I'm Duke right now, obviously you have your bye week. I'm sitting Leonard for the NC State game in full mental preparation mode to get ready for Florida State. Um, I want to see Duke's offense without Leonard in that NC State game. They obviously have the defense to shut down NC State, but let's see how your backup quarterback looks. Is he prepared in case, God forbid, Riley Leonard can't go in that Florida State game or another game down the road? Um, I rest Leonard the next 2 weeks, see if he's ready to go for Florida State. Don't push him to make that NC State game. Um, Obviously, I mean, I'm not the head coach at Duke. I can't tell you what to do, but that's what I would do in this situation. But I still have high hopes for Duke. If we look at Notre Dame, obviously they don't have a very easy schedule ahead. They're at Louisville this week. Then they have USC at home, and then they finally get a bye. They have not had a bye yet. They played 6 games so far, and they're sitting here at 5-1. If they can win this weekend, guess what? You're punching your bowl ticket already. Obviously, they have higher expectations, but it's not going to be an easy game for them on Saturday at Louisville. Louisville's a very good team. That's going to be a crazy environment on a Saturday night. And then, like I said, you have the defending Heisman winner, who I would personally say is a Heisman favorite right now, and Caleb Williams coming to town. And then you finally get that break. You have Pitt at home, then you're at Clemson, home against Wake Forest, and then at Stanford. Stanford isn't anything to be excited about, but this is a team. As an Oregon fan, I said this for their game on Saturday. Stanford likes to make Oregon and Notre Dame's life hell. When they have very good teams, no matter how good or bad Stanford is. So that's definitely not a game Notre Dame can turn their nose up at. I think it was 2014, 15. Notre Dame just needed to beat Stanford on the road. Stanford wasn't very good that season either. They just needed to beat them on the road, and they were going to the playoffs again, and they lost it on, I think, a field goal late. So uh, it might come down to that again. We'll have to wait and see. But going to be interesting to watch Notre Dame's schedule in the upcoming weeks. One thing I want to talk about real quick that really doesn't have anything to do with um, the Week 5 scoreboard, but I'm just baffled by the fact that this is what's happening. So I'm looking at going to Marshall, playing at Appalachian State on November 4th. The same day, Notre Dame is visiting Clemson. Obviously, Notre Dame right now is a top 10 team. Um, Tickets at this moment, at the time of recording, for the App State game are more expensive than the Notre Dame Clemson game. Not complaining at all. That blew my mind. I was like, there's no way, right? But something I noticed that I just wanted to point out real quick. Let's go ahead and we're going to look at our updated pick'em standings. Slade had a huge week. He went 14-2 this past week, vaults himself right back up underneath Nick. He's 1 game back. Nick, still a solid week, 10-6. I had a rough week on my own. I went 9-7. That includes the Friday games we picked last week. Our updated cash out records from this past weekend. Nick went 0-2, so he sits at 9-4. Slade went 1-1. He sits at 4-8-1. And I went 1-2. I foolishly took 3 games this week. I knew I shouldn't have, but still sitting at 500. I'm sitting at 7-7 right now. Next thing we're going to look at really quickly here is the updated Jack Wiggins Sports rankings. So one thing we didn't talk about on here last week was the bottom 25. So we rank all 133 FBS schools, and so from worst or from best to worst. And I made a TikTok about it. We didn't really talk about it on here. But here are your 25 worst teams in college football. One thing that's different than this is obviously you want to not be at the bottom. So you'll see on the top 25, the green schools are teams that moved up in the rankings, from 25th to 1st or got closer from there. Here, you want to get farther from the worst teams. So green teams are the schools that moved from, say, 2nd up to 24th or something like that. But let's go ahead and talk about these. Teams that weren't in the bottom 25 last week are going to be not ranked, or they didn't move at all. They had the 0 next to them. Teams that dropped have the red. 25th is Navy. Then we have UTSA, Northern Illinois, Akron, uh, UAB, Charlotte, Arkansas State, Temple, Western Michigan, Illinois, San Diego State, Buffalo, um, Arizona State, Sam Houston State, Middle Tennessee, Southern Miss, Virginia. Then we have UConn, UTEP, Hawaii, UMass, Stanford, Ball State, Kent State, and then Nevada. So those are the 25 worst teams in college football as it sits right now through 6 weeks in time for the top 25. Number 25 is Tennessee. Then we have Liberty, Alabama, Florida State, Fresno State, Oregon State, Texas A&M, Louisville, Ole Miss, Ohio State, Duke, Air Force, Syracuse, Texas, Miami, Georgia, Maryland. Who did I say for here? I gotta enlarge this really. Sorry, it was Kentucky, Syracuse, Texas, Miami, Georgia, Maryland, Air Force, Washington, Michigan, Notre Dame, USC, Penn State, Oklahoma, and then Oregon is your top 25 teams according to the Jackwagon Sports poll. Um, that'll do it for last week's recap. Let's go ahead and talk about Nebraska visiting Illinois. This will be 8 o'clock on Friday on Fox Sports One. Uh, Huge team for both. Huge game for both teams. Excuse me. Um, Obviously, you have Nebraska coming off that difficult loss at home to Michigan. Everybody thought it'd be. Shouldn't say everybody. People were were picking it to be a lot closer than I think it was a 21-point spread at kickoff. Did not finish that way at all. It was 45-7 at the final. And then we already talked about Illinois, you know, getting basically just beat down by Purdue. Not a result I think a lot of people saw coming at all. So now all of a sudden, um, both of these teams are fighting for their future. If I'm This is a must win for both teams if they want to have any hope at making a bowl game. Um, we already talked about Nebraska's outlook, or excuse me, Illinois' outlook. So Nebraska, they have this game: Northwestern, Purdue, Michigan State, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Iowa. Um, so let's just say Nebraska wins this; they'd be sitting at 3-3. I think they beat Northwestern, so there's four. Michigan State is five, and then I think they beat Iowa at the end of the season. That gives you six. I don't see them beating Wisconsin or Maryland. Purdue is a toss-up, I would say at this point. Um, so if I'm this every game from here on out is a must-win, but it definitely starts with this game. You're going to be on the road at Illinois. Illinois is very down right now. So is Nebraska. And neither team's offense is performing. Nebraska's defense needs to have a huge rebound. You know, they were one of the top defenses in the country, and all of a sudden, Michigan just exploits every nook and cranny and just blows Nebraska out of the water. Illinois was kind of the same story against Purdue. So for me, it's whose defense can rebound the best this week. Let's look at our picks. Slade and Nick are both going to go with Nebraska on the road. I might as well give them the kiss of death. I'm going to go with Nebraska as well. I think Nebraska rebounds a little bit better. I think Illinois is way too down on themselves right now. It's a very bleak outlook talking about their schedule ahead. Um, if Nebraska loses this, I don't think they make a bowl game. But if they win, I think there's that track or path ahead for them to do that. So that's going to be what we're watching out for the rest of the season. But I'm going to take Nebraska on the road to beat Illinois. That'll be 8 o'clock Friday on Fox Sports One. That'll do it for Blitz Boys this week. As always, we thank you guys so much for checking us out. We're releasing more content weekly on YouTube. We have our college football stock market videos that come out, the college football awards. We also post those over on TikTok as well. We have Saturday morning out of the tunnel. Another thing that we're currently working on and hopefully doing this week, there will be an announcement if we are able to do it this weekend or this week, is we want to start live streaming watch alongs with games again. We did this last year. It was called the Swear Jar Sweat. So we took our money that we put in our swear jar every week and we put it on one bet. It was a bowl game. We watched the Gasparilla Bowl between Wake Forest and Missouri. And don't necessarily have to do a betting sweat every week. We might. Details on that are still yet to be worked out, but we'd like to pick a game every week to sit down and watch. Saturdays are usually really busy for us between work schedules, families, and so on and so forth. So we'd like to make it a Thursday or Friday night game from here on out. But we will definitely keep you guys in the loop and post that information as it becomes available. But without me dragging this ending out anymore, thank you guys so much for checking us out, and we will see you in the next video.